Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Good to see you. Good to see you all. There you are. Thanks to Josh for holding in there last week, because I'll tell you what, we had a throw up a thon here at the Baker household. Just for the taste of it, sponsored by Diet Coke. We wish. Everybody had the stomach virus, and then I went to soccer practice the other day and found out like everybody, like all the families were sick. So that's fun. But welcome back to Revolution. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all of you folks all over this great planet. So here we are. What's going on? Hope you guys are doing okay. The world still seems to be melting down, and at least, the United States, but I watch the BBC, so I know some people over there, over the pond, are also going through a lot. Yeah, life is really strange and really tough on a lot of people right now. And I mean, it's so overwhelmingly so wild, everything that's going on. I mean, gun violence and homelessness and just book bans and closing libraries and weird laws, and everybody's got their opinions, and so it's just kind of insanity. Like, the world is insane. And we're going to talk a little bit about, like, what do we do in a world like that today? Yeah, I was trying to think if I had any fun news for you guys, except for the fact that I've just been trying to dad and take care of the kiddos, and they're on spring break right now, but they're with mom. So, but how about I get to go to a soccer game today, so I'm excited about that. All right, well, here we are. Revolution. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for finding. Oh, I'm very caffeinated. I had the McDonald's coffee, iced coffee, is cheaper than Starbucks, and it has about 500 more milligrams, I think, of caffeine in it, because every time I take every time I drink McDonald's coffee, I should not get a large. I feel like I'm alive. I have hope and superpowers. And then, like, as soon as service is over, I'm like, the world hates me. Anyway. So between gun violence and politicians and all the cruelty out there in the world, what we try to do here is argue well and have tough conversations and not really try to take one side or another. Of course, there's going to be leanings and things like that. That's going to happen. But the fact is everybody's welcome here, no matter belief system or political system or whatever it is. It's all here. So we're all here, and we try to respect each other with good conversations and good disagreeing well and respectfully. But I'll tell you what, lately, and this is part of my talk here, is I've been really, like, feeling tired and frustrated. And if you're a parent, you probably get this, where sometimes you're just really exhausted and tired, or if you've taken care of people, even when they're sweet, start like chewing or something like that starts to drive you crazy. You're just like a little thing that shouldn't bother you. You're like, ugh. I remember right when my dad got out of prison, he used to chomp his cereal and he would make this round. I'd make this weird noise when he ate his cereal. And it drove me insane. But I remember thinking to myself, like, you know what? I'm glad he's not in prison. I'm glad he's not in prison. Let him chew. And so I don't think I ever told him to stop chewing. Because when we were, actually, it was really weird. We were roommates one time in Los Angeles for like 7 months, 8 months. And we had separate rooms, but the kitchen was in my room. So and I'd be like, ah. Anyhow. But so lately I found myself tired and frustrated with everyone's crap, everyone's shit. I mean, anyone's opinion really has just like, it's like time for me to like step back a little bit from online. And I've tried to do that because I've just been like, like, you'll see stuff and be like, well, let's go to the other side and look at that. And I'm just like, everybody's making me crazy, And I think there's just so much news and so much information and so much like negativity coming out right now in the world and so much suffering that it really gets overwhelming. And I think what bothers me is this is how really awful we are to each other, like really awful. And things, all these things I don't understand why people do certain things that they do. And, like I could get into it and go on a list of things, but it's ridiculous. I mean, if you've been online at all over the past, I don't know, few months, you'd probably get it. Why it's so infuriating and so frustrating. And I ask, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with this, with revolution, because we talk about this a lot, but I feel like, I'm really like beat this to death and I'm a broken record. But honestly, I don't think we can be a broken record enough on this type of thing. And that if we really want to see some sort of change, that we're going to have to continue to do this. But when will we stop this like binary, simplistic thinking? This us versus them. The loyalty to concepts or our hoped for utopian society, has got to end. Like this idea of like, well, if just the Republicans, they could take and make us all safe, and, or the Democrats, if they would just control everything, we'd have a utopian society, and then we're fighting each other over this idea that these people are that different. And I have a feeling a lot of us are being played and given crumbs from the table. Now, what some people don't feel like those are crumbs because they're big things. But if you look at the majority of people, and the majority of people in the country, in the world, are suffering, and we still don't have health care. People are going homeless. I've watched, I think maybe a quarter of my complex people move out because they can't afford to live in affordable housing anymore. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's scary what's happening, and that real issues, aren't being tackled every day. And so we've got both of these sides with these kind of like dreams of if just the other side would win. And it's tough because I've said stuff like this online and things, and people always want to like, it's weird to see how people are like dedicated to their political group like a team, or even more like a god. Like there's just no questioning it, and that they're the right, and that this is how it works. And it's scary. It's really scary because we forget the humanity of people who don't think like us, and we become very closed-minded. And then in a way we go like, but we're also, some of us are the same people who are like, oh, I left the church because, if I didn't think like them or subscribe to their ideas, I was out, and what are we doing to other people? Like, well, we just have a broader ideas, but if you don't subscribe to my broader, cooler ideas, you're out. You know what I mean? Like, we're just trading exclusive clubs for exclusive clubs and pushing people out, like when I was fighting for LGBTQ stuff, a lot of my thing was like, hey, kids are becoming homeless, they're being kicked out of their houses and things like that, So why should I be happy that people are like separating from their parents and leaving home because there's difference in political, because, oh, my parents are conservative and I can't stand them, so I'm cutting them out of my life. Like, this kind of separation should not be the things that we're like celebrating either way. Like, the idea is like, how do we have hard conversations? Not how do we divide each other? How do we hurt each other? And so, like, I get it. Like, there, there's a reason I voted Democrat my whole life. There's a reason, like, when I fought gay rights, I was, on the Democrat side. And I think they've done great things for the LGBT community, but I don't think they've done enough. And I don't think they've done enough for people, the poor people, hurting people, and humans in this world, and people of color, and things like that. So I'm just saying, like, and I also don't think the conservatives have either. The only thing, the difference between the conservatives is, I feel like, is the conservatives just tell us they're not going to do anything. And then the Democrats go, oh, we're going to do something. Or they go, oh, we can't do it because of the Republicans. It's just blame, blame, blame. And the point is this is a broken system, in my opinion. And it comes from philosophy and theology and reading and growing up in this world. And this is my opinion. It doesn't have to be your opinion. That's the great thing about revolution. We can agree to disagree. And we can disagree well. But the thing is, when will we get tired of being kind of gaslit into being loyal to politicians? I mean, think about politicians. I mean, politicians on either side. Just think, like, and then, like, and it's not that I'm against politicians, because I don't know what, I was telling somebody the other day, like, I don't know what my price would be, like if the NRA came to me and was like, hey, we're just want to somehow support your, your run for like $5 million and maybe give you some stock options and, whatever, we could do some things like that. I don't know, like, what it would take to buy me off, but I know that we shouldn't be allowing this type of thing. So the reason I wanted to express this frustration today is because there's Paul in Romans takes two different verses from the Psalms and puts them together. And it's a bit of a lament in Romans. And it's in Romans 3. And I've really been like feeling this, because I think there's times where, we want to reject, like, theologically, it's like, oh, are we all born sinful? I reject that because we're good and you're happy and you should feel good about yourself. But if sin is separation, like Tillich talks about, then we all deal with this. We all struggle. We all separate from one another. We all judge each other. Yeah, well, my father is very conservative and made a coin that said, Donald Trump on it, and hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. So I understand the struggle. You're not alone in these struggles. I just saw somebody say something about, how hard it is. It is hard. My father's cut me out of his life completely. And I don't know if it's because of my beliefs of LGBTQ people or my political leanings or my theological leanings, or he just is, or I'm just not, I don't know. So I understand. That's the thing is why I think why having tough conversations are good is because when I see something like that, people are like, well, what if this? I'm like, well, it is this. This is what we're all going through. We're all going through this together. It's like a friend of mine's kids were in a school shooting the other day. It's like they're getting closer and closer. Like this suffering and this hardships are getting closer, and it's really tough. But so this idea is like, instead of saying, well, if only these group was in charge, or only these, what we've got to do is we've got to learn how to be human again. Like, we all should be really worried that kids are dying. We should all be worried about that. That should be number one. Like, I think we should all take a lot of our hard issues and maybe go like, all right, maybe not take all the guns away, but there definitely needs to be some sensible gun action, something like that. I mean, that's things like, as human beings, we should be able to come together and worry about each other's lives and put each other's lives above an amendment or whatever, like, because I was arguing with somebody the other day. I'll give you an example. And and they said, well, it's not guns, Jay, it's mental health. And I said, okay. I said, so why don't we set up something, like, why don't they make it a law then that if you want to purchase a firearm, that you have to be evaluated, have a psych evaluation, maybe take 6 months, you go in a few times and you get that. And they didn't want that, so it's like, well, you can't have it both ways. We can't, so, but there's got to be ways to figure this stuff out. Trust me, there's got to be a way to figure this out. So, listen, a lot of you guys are here at this church in this community, because you've left other communities or you don't feel comfortable. I get that. I'm seeing a lot of the comments come up. But what we're trying to do here is figure out ways we can argue well and change things, so this doesn't continue to happen to people over and over and over again. That's what we want to see. I want to see change in community. I would like to see the church simplify itself and maybe just be a group of people going to a bar or at a restaurant and spending time together and talking about life and what they're going through and how they're working through issues. I mean, I think we should, I think less would be more at this point. So the idea here is, well, the reason this is called Revolution is that we're trying to change things. We want to change the world. We want to change the church. We want it to be a safer place. I want it to be a place that's less than people's business, to be honest with you. And that politics aren't, you can't say like, oh, if you, politics aren't God, where maybe love is the idea. Love is the ideal that drives us. So there you go with that. And then I had another thing where I went on another, somehow my Facebook decided I think a certain way, and it was like throwing up this thing that I didn't agree with. And it kept throwing up these ads about, it's not that I don't agree with it or agree with it. It was just something that I just thought was absurd, because it had to do with like advertisement and, the beer companies and all that crap. And I'm like, the advertisers don't care about people. They care about money, like most corporations don't care. And so I went in and I was like, I saw somebody say something really wild. So I was wondering, hey, what if we took this type of energy and put it towards like workers' rights, or like making our phones less harmful to children who have to mine for the chemicals that make in the products and the type of things that make our phones. Like, what if we made the working conditions safer? Like, what if we put that type of energy behind that? We're making sure Nike's doing the right thing. Like all these things. Like, what if we were doing something that really mattered, rather than like, some corporation's advertisement strategy? And the weird thing is they just shut me down. And all of a sudden, all these, like, I was getting like their Facebook page was coming up literally every other thing. I was like, this is so weird. And I said those two things, and within 5 minutes, it all disappeared. And I realized I'd been blocked from this thing. And I wasn't arguing angrily or anything like that. I was just saying like, hey, here's some other ideas if we put this type of energy towards stuff. Now, this is not the one, I don't want to say it's crazy, but this is the wild thing here, is that, they shut me down. And what I started to think was, the danger here isn't creating an echo chamber. And we see this happen a lot in churches and a lot in communities. I've seen it happen in right conservative communities and left communities. I've seen, where people have been like, we're fighting all against all these conservative pastors, and then all of a sudden you have to join their group, and then you get in their group, and then it becomes toxic, and then they go after each other. And I've seen it where I've seen conservatives do this on an even bigger stage, because that's how I grew up, with these kind of like ignoring what's happening in the world, and just kind of like no one disagrees with the pastor, and the pastor goes, oh, I must be hearing from God all the time. But it creates this echo chamber. And so when we're unable to have disagreements or ask questions or have arguments, it gets really, really bad. That's why it worries me, like when I, seeing those young men kicked out of Congress in Tennessee. I mean, thank goodness they're back. But just the fact that there's not even room for dissent, there's not room for questioning authority and things like that. And I felt like that a lot in my high school as a kid. I went to high school in Orlando, Florida, and especially in that public school, like there was no room for dissent. And I felt that same way when I was in my private school in Florida before that, that there was zero tolerance for dissent. But it was like asking questions were very frowned upon. And so where do we get to a place where we're not offended or angry by questions that might not, that, I mean, if we're threatened by questions, then there's something that we're not sure about in our own thoughts, in our own life. I saw this thing the other day. I'm going to keep ranting because that's what I do. You know, I saw this guy, Dan, who I really like, Dan McClellan, I think, is it? Dan McClellan, who does biblical scholarship. And he showed this video of this guy who was talking to this Christian woman, and this atheist guy was saying, there's 15 religions that came before Christianity that are just have all the same things. They have the virgin birth, they have the walking on water, they have the miracles, and they have all this stuff. And so it goes to Dan, who's a scholar, religious scholar, and he goes, no, this isn't true. Now, what's really crazy is when I was doing Revolution in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that neo-atheism thing, that really like popular new atheism thing was happening, a lot of people would come and argue this with me. And at the beginning, I didn't realize I didn't know if they were right or wrong. I was like, oh, are there really 15 other religions that are exactly the same as Christianity that came before? Not 15. I don't think they used 15. I think I would have gotten along with that. But they're like, don't you know this religion and that religion? And to find out, like, yeah, there's religions that have virgin birth, or there's religions that have healing, but there's not religions that are recorded to have two of those things together, you know? And I was like, oh. But I was living in such a world that I was outside of that. And then when that world broke in, I wasn't even thinking about it, you know? And so now being more open to things, hearing other people's opinions, learning from other people, reading about atheism, reading about biblical history, even when it come to conclusions that don't make me happy, you know, that makes me more human and more able to understand these things. But instead, that new information kind of shook me. I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, because it, I mean, basically just saying like, oh, these are just traditions that get passed down and turn into other religions, and it's all fake and God is a lie and blah, blah, blah. You know, and I'm like this young pastor being like, oh no. And it wasn't true. But I bought it as truth for many years. You know, I thought, well, there must be. And I've even had educated people who I knew who'd gone to seminary and things like tell me the same thing, you know? And until I finally like saw Dan and then looked into it for myself, you know, and going like, oh. So when we, you know, so even when we create a bubble to protect ourselves, new information could come in and shake us. Like we should really, I encourage community to be outside of just the regular world, and that we have tough conversations and that we argue well and learn about what other people's opinions are. Like if there's an opinion that you disagree with that really shakes you, maybe look into it, because maybe there's some either medium ground there, or maybe you're wrong. And maybe that's what worries you. You know, I mean, there's times to like look into these things. And I'm not saying you have to put yourself in harm's way and you have to go talk to I'm not saying go talk to your abusive, you know, racist grandpa or anything like that, you know, but what I'm saying is, you know, start out small though, you know, thinking differently, you know, reading books that might not be the ones that you completely agree with. I'm not saying you have to go out and buy, you know, I don't know, Jerry Falwell's autobiography or something, but, you know, just little books or little things, or just engaging in thought and learning to grow. So what I wanted to read with my frustration, which seems a bit much now that I've gone on a little rant that I've lost steam, but is a verse that I always thought was a little bit harsh, but right now is one of those things that's kind of related to a little bit today. And this is Paul quoting, I think it's from Psalms 14 and then one of the Psalms in 53. I think the two Psalms that Paul puts. See, sometimes Paul takes verses, and Jesus did this too. Like they'll leave something out or they'll add something, and some people would call that cherry picking if you and I do it, but if Jesus and Paul do it, oh, it must be inspired. Interesting. So Paul here says, what then? Are we better off? This is Romans 3:9. No, not at all, for we have already charged that all are both Jews and Greeks are under the power of sin, as it is written. So he's saying both Jews and Greeks, or Jews and Gentiles, things like that we talk about. There is no one who is right, not even one. There is no one who has understanding. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned aside together. They have become worthless. There is no one who shows kindness. There is not even one. Their throats are open graves. They use their tongue to deceive. The venom of vipers is under their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery are their paths. And the way of peace they have not known. There's no fear of God before their eyes. So this is Paul, and he goes, now I know whenever the law says it speaks of those who are under the law, so their mouths may be silenced, and those who are world. Anyway, the whole point is Paul saying this is true of all of us. And if you don't believe this, and I get it, but there's some people, when they see you come, they may go, oh, they may cringe, you know. I've had friends who are like, that was the thing is I remember like early in my career, because when as a young person, became like completely Democrat before I could vote and all this stuff. And everything I saw growing up was like, you know. And so I would hang out with, I ended up hanging out with, I ended up working with a lot of conservative folks who are great and genuine, loving folks, to be honest with you. And I ended up hanging out with a lot of progressive folks who are also nice and wonderful people. But there were times where I realized that there were lines or things I could not say or could not cross that became conditions. And I've always tried to want to care about people unconditionally. And all of a sudden I realized, and some might say boundaries, but these were a little more to do with politics than anything else. And I started to see these people who became very legalistic in their political beliefs on both sides. And I was a little bit more surprised about the left, because I thought, oh, that's the church thing. That's the conservative thing. Only those are the guys that do that crap. And these are the guys that don't. And that's why I'm hanging out with these guys. And then realize, oh, no, they do the same thing, because it's kind of human nature to want to have some sort of law and some sort of thing that we feel good about. And it just became, I realized that some groups were stricter and some groups were less. Even in like a 12-step program, there's some people who are like super legalistic, big book thumpers, and there are other people who are a little more open and, a little more loosey-goosey. And you find what works for you in the 12-step programs. But the fact is you can find legalism in every system, And I think we often leave the church because of this this restricting system that doesn't allow these certain things. But do we go into a more liberal system and then become the gatekeepers there? And then we become these gatekeepers who are all of a sudden telling people, oh, you can't belong, you can't do that, and then we, they, ostracize people, we cancel people, whatever. It all becomes these things where we're throwing each other out. Now, why I say this is because depending on your view, where you're standing, legalism, by any other name, still feels the same. So for some people on the conservative side, they feel threatened and scared because of us liberals. They think we're going to just, make everything legal and whatever, and we're not going to do anything. I don't know, and then we're going to take their guns away, and then the government's going to take over or something like that. I'm not sure exactly. And then there's us folks who are like on the liberal side. We're like, oh, there's going to be guns everywhere and no abortions, and you're going to lock up our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and only the poor will pay taxes. So we got all these like really crazy ideas, and we get scared, especially during voting season. You're the bad guy, and you're the bad guy. Rather than sitting down and just realizing, like, how do we be more human to each other? How do we live and let live? As far as I'm understanding, like, all this stuff is like how we treat each other and can be seen as each other as like venom off of our lips, that we bring ruin and misery in their paths. So I'm sure, like, maybe times when I would go visit my dad and be like, Dad, I don't think what you're saying is right. He didn't see that naturally as like a good conversation. He may have saw that as an attack. That's honestly, I've worked a lot through my therapist to kind of figure out why my dad doesn't want to talk to me. And that's all I could think of, is that maybe like me speaking the truth to him really hurt him and hurt his, his ego. And he's just not used to that because he's kind of got himself in a bubble. I don't know. But that was the type of thing. And so he would be hurt and pull back. And I don't want, because Jay says things that aren't nice. And it wasn't that I was like, Dad, I don't want you to be around. It was like, Dad, I want to help you. And in fact, one of the last times we talked, I was trying to help him and defend him against this like group called Christian Right Watch, who just seemed to be like attacking him like insane. And I was calling them saying like, hey, have you checked this? Have you looked into this? Have you tried to talk with them? You know, I was trying to help. But it's tough. So sometimes this is what people see. And so I think it's safe to say, if we jump over to Romans, I'm going to jump over to Romans 3:21. We're going to hop around Romans just a little bit. We won't be here all day, but just a little bit. Now, one of the things I want to look back at is, if you followed along with us if you listened to You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich, which Pete Rollins read a couple talks ago at Revolution for us, and we did a 2-week, two-part series on You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich. And in that talk, and in Tillich's theology, he talks about sin versus grace, and how sin, he sees sin, and I agree with Tillich on this, is sin is separation, and it's separation from others. Oh, so, you know, and sin is separation from ourselves. And I'm making weird face. I'm sorry. I look like a Muppet today. And the ground of being, which that's what he calls God. And so sin is these separations. Now he says grace is reunion. Grace is reunion with ourselves and reunion with the other and reunion with God, or the ground of being. So, bum, 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 where are we going? Yes, I just saw someone put peace, siblings. Yes, peace. You know, peace so we can, you know, we can disagree. It's okay. It's okay. We're grown-ups. We can disagree. You know what? Sometimes when I disagree with somebody, if it's not that important, I just shut the hell up and eat. If it's kind of uncomfortable, sometimes I'll run to the bathroom. And then I'll come back and see if they're still talking. And other times I'll say, hey, have you ever thought of it like this? And not everybody's ready for that, but it's okay. You know, people, we can then say, hey, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I'm just part of a community where we try to discuss things that we disagree with in a non-threatening way, and maybe open up a new door for them. You see what I'm saying? So we've got sin, which is separation, and grace is reunion. And so why I want to do that is I wanted to look at Romans 3:21 in that light. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been disclosed and is attained by the law and the prophets, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ. For all who believe, for there is no distinction. So he's saying, and if you went through Galatians with us, there's no distinction. There's neither male nor female, no Jew, no Gentile, slave nor free. We're all one in Christ. There's no Democrat or Republican. We're all one in Christ. Not even Green Party. What? We're all one in Christ. Those things can come underneath us, right? But listen to this in 23. Since all have sinned, all fall short of the glory of God. So all have sinned. All have experienced separation. So separation from God, separation from ourselves, and separation from each other. Since all have sinned, all fall short of glory of God. They are now justified by his grace, by Christ's grace, as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. And how I see this is it's saying you're separated, but you have the grace. You are reunited with God. And then you have the ability to be reunited with yourself and united with others. You can or you can't, but you are reunited through grace. And the idea of grace is grace doesn't come in and say, I'm going to push my beliefs on you and I'm going to push my convictions on you. Grace just comes in and says, you're accepted. And what it does is allow you to learn who you are and what your convictions are and what your feelings are. And that might be Christianity. It might be leaving Christianity. I mean, I know people who leaving Christianity, walking away from church and Christians has been extremely positive in their life. I can't lie. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and be like, oh, I've never seen that. Because the church is the magic bullet and we cure everything. You know, I'm not going to lie. I've seen people who are better out not being confessional Christians. or not being any type of Christian. That when they were Christians, they were hell on earth. And now that they're like, oh, I don't really know if I believe in that anymore, Jay. Oh, and they're doing their thing. And I'm going like, well, you're a lot nicer. That's strange, right? So it says, you're justified by grace, a gift through the redemption that is Christ, whom God put forward as a sacrifice atonement by his blood, effective through faith. He did this to show us his righteousness because in his divine forbearance he had. Now, we're not going to get into we just read that, but I'm not going to get into did Jesus have to die or anything like that. I think that's a talk for another day. Listen to this, that because he, in his divine forbearance, he had passed over the sins previously committed. It was to prove at the present time that he himself is righteous and that he is justified by the ones who faith in Jesus. Now, I remember reading that verse one time at a really big music festival, all these leaders from these different music festivals, actually. And I read this, that he passed over sins, those who sinned who sinned in previous times. And they all hated that verse. They did not like it. They were uncomfortable. They were coming up with every other way to say, no, Jay, you're translating that wrong. I'm like, well, then if we're held accountable for our sins now and they weren't before Jesus came, I'm like, how is this good news? And went over this whole thing and asking these questions. I mean, I was early 20s and ready to fight. Now I'm just like, I don't want to fight, but I'll disagree well, but I don't want to fight. But I had a lot of fight in me. And man, they were not happy with that. Oh, Jay, you caused too much trouble. And I was like, this is just literally a verse I read out loud at the thing. It goes on to say, then what becomes of boasting? It is excluded by the law, by that of works? No, but the law of faith, for we hold on to the person is justified by faith apart from works prescribed by the law. So there's no need for us to brag or boast. What we realize is I am who I am. I gotta be me. But if I got to be me, I also have to respect that other people might need to be themselves as well in order to find some sort of reunion in their life. And that reunion might be looking at different faiths. That might be looking at different political ideas or different thoughts. How do I disagree with someone at the same time allowing them to be human? How do I have passionate conversations with someone at the same time allowing them to be human, but also helping them to see others human? Those especially that they may hold as others. And that's another thing I've tried to do in my work. I think Dr. King did in his work. Gandhi did in his work. I think a lot of great leaders have done is allowing other people to see others as human. I think when Jesus came, Jesus often would sit down and talk to people, the story of the woman caught in the midst of adultery, or the woman at the well, and was allowing them to be humanized, was humanizing, not othering them, saying, well, here's the other, but guess what? The other is just like you. Has the same fears, has the same ideas in life, wants to live life, wants to be able to pay bills, take care of their family. There's things here, there's reasons here not to destroy each other and be so divided, because this country is divided, completely split. And it's really become just a horrible place, and both sides have gotten so legalistic with rules and regulations that if we don't learn to be nope, I'm digging a tunnel under the wall, folks. I'm not going to do this anymore. I got to learn more, and I got to humanize people, and we're never going to see eye to eye if we villainize each other all the time, And it's going to take strength to do that. And what I want to talk about is in this next part is part of that, and why I want to read 5, and I also want to read a bit of James today, which is really weird because Paul and James seem to have some different issues and seem to not always see eye to eye. But I found a place that Paul and James definitely share the same thing, eye to eye. And this is what I think for a lot of us, this is what it's going to take for us to grow and live in this situation. One more time, I just want to go back to what I read in Romans, where it says, there is no one who is righteous, not even one. There is no one who is understanding. There's no one who seeks God. All have turned aside together. They have become worthless. There's no one who shows kindness. There's not even one. And what I'm saying is, and I don't know if this is what Paul was going on with his frustration, but in my frustration right now, that's how I felt. I haven't felt like there's uber duper liberal, sweet, nice person comes along and says, well, Jay, here's a good opinion. I've been like, I don't like your opinion either. And I don't like your opinion either. I don't like anybody's opinion. Matter of fact, you probably don't like the fact that I just said the F word. Blah. I'm done. Everybody's making me mad. Like, you know, like, because I feel like there's this like veiled meaning behind everything. And then you go like, okay, I need to step back from the social media, take your kids out and go play soccer, do something, breathe, read a book. Don't let this all drive you insane. But it can. And so hopefully one of the things that some of you are listening today is like, I'm here to say like, I get it. It gets to the point where we don't even like the news we agree with. You know, we're just like, just shut up. And now we're in a world where we have to have the boundaries of turning these things off as well. One of the interesting things is, so a friend of mine gave me a Paul, not Paul Smith, you know, one of the, I'll talk about it later. It's a shirt, but we'll talk about it later because it was an interesting confusion for somebody the other day. Let's look at this. Let's look at like what it's going to take for us to have these tough conversations together. Romans 5. Romans 5, 1 through 5. Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God. So, so what it's saying is talking about grace. And so we kind of have we have this reunion with this God, or with the ground of being. I like ground of being because it's not this like being floating in the sky. Through whom we have obtained access to this grace in which we stand. We boast in our hope of sharing, but we also boast in our suffering, knowing that our suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So, the idea is, if grace is really this reunion with self and reunion with others, and if this is something that's going to happen, what we're going to have to learn, though, is this idea of endurance. And when we suffer, and how do we endure? Now, you might say, well, Jay, I'm tired. But you do endure. You do endure with the fear of bills. You do endure with how, oh, God, we have to pay taxes. You do endure with, oh, this news, oh, this event, oh, this person, oh, this job. There are moments in our lives where I think we can all find areas that we really do try our best to endure through things. Even our own voice sometimes might be very harsh on us, and we have to like shut those voices off, those negative voices inside, because we've had to endure them for so long. But by enduring them, we've learned to shut them down or have quiet. There's certain ways that we've learned to do this. But what I want to say is endurance is very important in the fact that if we are going to love each other and we are going to argue well, we have to learn to endure certain things and not be reactionary all the time, and not need to be right all the time. Not need to put a caveat every time we do something. I remember when people used to say like, oh, I really like that Jay Baker. I don't agree with the gay thing that he says, but I really like that guy. Or they would be like, oh, I really love Jim Baker. I mean, I don't agree with all that crap he did, but I really love it. It's like, you don't have to add that every time, because really when you say that, it just really just takes the steam out of everything else. Like, you don't have, like, I really like Martin Luther King, but I don't like the fact that he had an affair. Like, you don't have to say that. Like, as human beings, we should learn to well, what about that affair? Well, we all freaking make mistakes, I don't think it's great, but you know what? We all live and we all learn and we all don't do great things, and if we tried to, enjoy a human being's writings or work that was mistakenless, we wouldn't find one. Even Jesus was, could be angry and mean to people at times of things where I thought, oh, that seems a little bit harsh. So I don't think we're going to find anybody perfect, and he sat with the unclean, which would have made him ceremonially unclean. So, if we really want to pick, like, I really like that Jesus, except for, hanging out at the Gentiles' house before resurrection, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't agree with that. That would be the type of thing that we constantly have to do. So what I'm saying is what we do is we learn to just endure and shut up, and don't worry that I'm going to think that, oh, maybe you liked that one part that's really controversial about that person, like, wait to see if that comes up. And it's another thing that I used to see with my parents is people would come up and be like, I really hated you. I mean, I wanted to stomp on your head. I hate it. I thought you were everything wrong with Christianity, but I've forgiven you and I love you now. Like that whole, like, Knock them down before you tell me you're. And I know I used to do that all the time to people. Especially I did that once when I met with Jerry Falwell. So I get it. You know, you're like, I just need to heal me a little bit before I forgive you. But this idea of endurance, and what I thought was interesting is in the book of James, in James 1, James says the same thing. In James 1:2, it says, "My brothers and sisters, when you enter and you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may mature and complete, lacking in nothing." And I think what both of these things are saying is that maturity and learning to deal with one another and learn to endure helps us love people better. 1 Corinthians 13, love never gives up, never loses faith, it's always hopeful, endures. It endures through every circumstance. But we have to kind of learn endurance and work on endurance if we aren't able to, if we want to endure, if we want to love people, endurance is part of it. I used to say that all the time. Like, man, if you want to learn to endure, just try loving people. Just try loving everybody. Don't just love your enemies, love other people's enemies. And then you'll be their enemies, and then you might be the enemy's enemies, and you're going to really learn to endure. And it's a really fun game to play. And I would like to say that this isn't possible, but I think it is a possibility. I think I saw my mother do this most of the time. I saw very few people that she was extremely angry at, and I never knew a person that she wasn't willing to forgive, ever. And I know there might have been a few people like Falwell who she had to forgive a few times, but I saw her live this way and love this way and care this way. So I know it's not impossible. And I know that this is something that we desperately need. Or, I think we're already in like a civil war of the mind and of the mouth with how we treat each other. I mean, let's just hope it doesn't get more violent than the world is violent right now. So this idea of endurance and learning to grow is important. I'm going to end with Romans 8, 35. Because I want to talk about this idea of grace as reunion and the idea of sin as separation. Okay? And so what I'm trying to say is that maybe if sin is really separation, I want you to look at this really hard. What are the things that are causing you to separate from other people? And does that feel like it could be like, could that be the sin? Could sin be something that we never really thought about in another way? And rather than being like, it's dirty movies and, stealing a candy at the store, or whatever. That if it's really separation from each other's humanity and from ourselves, then we're going to have to rethink everything as far as religion is concerned, especially Christianity. We're going to have to rethink how we do this and how it works. And I think it's time. I think it's time, folks. We're completely divided. We have Christians on both sides, so it's not like we have just Christians on the right or Christians on the left. But there's these things, these idols, these gods that we have created, that we made up and that we elected and that we put there, have become idols. And makes you understand the Book of Kings a little bit more, am I right? But Romans 8:35, I think, sends this one home, and we'll seal up the envelope and put a stamp on it. And it's funny because I was like, I hate always like being the cherry picker preacher, because I do that a lot. But it's great about Romans is like Paul just basically goes on and says the same thing over and over again to try to convince us of different ways to say and convince us of the same thing. And those few verses in between, mostly. And I'm sure there's a few nuggets of difference in there, but there's a lot of that. Like, well, what I mean is when he's trying to define like Gentiles and Jews can be together and what the law is and that we're free from the law and all that stuff. So, Romans 8:35 says, "Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or a sword, which would be any type of like physical violence. As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. And at those times they were really going through that. Paul was one of those people who persecuted Christians like that. We are accounted as sheep to be slaughtered. And I want you to look at this way of not of like, oh, mourner way, but like with people who think differently than us, we often are like really seen as sheep to be slaughtered to each other. Like, I mean, I watch so many people I watch a lot of my really smart progressive brothers just tear apart conservative Christians, just tear them down, make fun of them. Like, that's what their whole social media thing is. And I'm like, man, you guys are like theologians and like philosophers. And like, I didn't get that formal education. You get this formal education and all you're doing is spending it like tearing the side down. I don't, and I know like I'm all for having a joke and having a wink, especially like my old denomination, the Assemblies of God that my parents grew up in, or I give neo-Calvinists a hard time a lot of the times. But like when it's just like this constant like hammer, 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 and it's as though you just see these people as like these dumb sheep, and but somehow I have got the truth. And to me, it just reminds me of like being a kid and seeing the old white guys being like, we're the old white Baptists and we've got the truth and you kids don't. It just feels like it's just reversed. Now the kids are being like, nope, we've got the truth and you don't. It's like a children's book or something. It's bizarre to me. And it's still separation. So for my good friend Paul Tillich, who also had his own issues in life, but it's separation. And this is a man who was kicked out of Germany by the Nazis. So he knows something about separation. And strange separation. But it's sin, is what he says. So who will separate us from this love? Hardship? No. Distress? No. Persecution? No. Famine? No. Nakedness? No. Or peril or sword? I always have this fear of being homeless. So when he says, famine or nakedness or peril, I think, oh, that's always kind of like a thing that haunts me for some reason. It always makes me like, I have like this little fear I have in the back of my mind. But not even that. Not even your worst fears. As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. For you are counted as sheep to be slaughtered. Now we just do it. We continue to do this in the name of Jesus now. Anyway, and we've become the best at separation, unfortunately. But it's time we look at this in a serious way. Like, yeah, the church has really been about separation for too long. And that's why I said maybe the church needs to just rethink and be like 5 people at dinner. No, in all these things, we are more than conquerors. My mom loved this verse. Through him, she loved being more than a conqueror. Who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, I'm going to go ahead and add this, nor theology, nor political beliefs. And he says, nor angels, nor rulers, oh, there's some politicians, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor heights, nor depths. So you can fly now. We can fly. Christians can fly. Nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. I like in the New Living, it says neither the gates of nor the gates of hell will separate us from the love of God. And so what this is saying is that grace is this great reunion for us, and that we've been reunioned with either God or the ground of being or love or whatever you want to call it, has been reunited, boom, and nothing's going to separate us that. So we can't sin it away. There's no sinning it away. But the sin is in when we separate ourselves from others or when we separate ourselves from ourselves. And I think there's always going to be some emptiness that we'll live with. I think there's always going to be the lack, which is a philosophical term and also a psychological term of kind of this emptiness inside that I think I've often talked about before, where I feel like the idea of capitalism saying that we can be completely happy tries to fill. I think it's human to have some sort of lack constantly. And I think that it's almost Christ-like to live in something where you're not, there's always maybe something with we have an unconscious that we don't connect with. It's just, it's maybe I'm reading too much Freud, which I think also was someone who wanted to help us understand each other better and maybe live in a world where we weren't so ostracized from each other. But here's the idea, is that none of these things will separate us. So, we've got to learn to endure. That's the thing. We've got to learn to endure and grow. And, someone just wrote, I don't know if happiness is our goal here. Neither do I. I don't think it is, to be honest with you. I mean, I like happiness. It's a good place to be. Honestly, I'd really just sometimes like to be alone and just quiet and read. But helping others find peace is why I exist, and to maybe make this world a little bit tiny better than I left. My mom did it, and I was grateful to be a part of that. So maybe we can do it. Anyhow, what was my last note here? So there it is. That's today for you guys. Let's try to learn to endure and have tough conversations, continue to beat this thing, and learn to love each other more and disagree well, and see what comes after that. That's the thing, is like, I can't say like, I've seen the future. Oh my God, I saw somebody say they love that quote from Ice-T. I follow Ice-T, and he's got so many amazing quotes sometimes, and he has this thing called the Ice Cold Truth. It's really cool too. But yeah, but I think if we want to continue to move forward, we've got to learn to do this more. But I want to say, I guess for me, is what I'm trying to say is, like, you're not suffering alone. And like, I totally agree with, like, I feel like I'm at that part with Paul in Romans 3, where he's like, nobody's good, everybody's got freaking poison on their lips, everybody's crap, like, I feel that I'm there, and I'm still working on it to not always be there, and learning on ways to not always be there. But I do want this community to be a part of the change that we really want to see, and I think we can make things better. I mean, yeah, different and better, but there's a lot of work ahead. Thanks a lot. Hey, listen, if you like what we're doing, you can go to revolutionchurch.com, and there's a support button. You can support us financially, or you can share just like what we're doing and let people know, like, retweet the talks, put them on your stories in your talks, share the talks in your stories on Instagram or on your Facebook stuff. Let people know what we're doing. That would really help. And I appreciate y'all very much. And we'll talk next week. So have a good week. And be nice to somebody. Be nice to another. Be nice to someone who's another this week. See how that goes. All right, folks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.